Welcome back to Grain IQ. I'm your host, Chad Moyer. Grain marketing is a critical piece in keeping your operation profitable, and here at Grain IQ, we strive to help you better understand the markets. This podcast is a joint project between the Nebraska Rural Radio Association and the Nebraska Soybean Board. If you have not heard other episodes, we do have an archive wherever you're listening to this podcast. We'd invite you to listen to prior seasons and prior shows of the Nebraska Rural Radio Association and the Grain IQ podcast. And tell your friends, tell your neighbors, be sure and rate it as well. And that helps spread the word about Grain IQ. On today's program, we are going to talk about what I would call a significant event that takes place in August every year. It is the Pro Farmer Crop Tour. And here to tell us a little bit about this event, what it is, how it's accomplished, and the significance of this event is Chip Flory. Chip with Pro Farmer. Chip, thanks for visiting with us here today. Have you been with Pro Farmer the entire time that the crop tour has been going on?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I went on crop tour before Pro Farmer was running crop tour when Jim Quinton, a private grain or crop consultant, was running the tour. And I was a reporter for Futures World News out of the Chicago Bureau. That's when I started to go on crop tour. I've missed one since 1988. I've missed one, and that was in 1991. I'm not even sure why I didn't go on crop tour in 1991, but then in 1992, I helped Jim with the whole process, and in 1993, that was the first year that Pro Farmer took it over. So let's see, what are we working on? Crop tour number 32 for Pro Farmer now? I guess that's what it is, Chad.
Yeah, 32 years. So can you give me a little bit of historical background? You know, before Pro Farmer was involved in that, what was the basis for doing something like this? What were the decisions that were made to start something like this that traveled, really the entire Corn Belt?
Yeah, as I understand, the tour started in the 70s. The Illinois Farm Bureau was out there doing it, and that's when they got Jim Quinton involved. Quinton expanded it from an Illinois tour to include Ohio, Indiana, Iowa, and just a sliver of Minnesota. And that's when I was involved in the tour first as well. And then in 1996, we decided that we should probably include, the number 3 and number 4 biggest corn producing states in the country, that being Nebraska and Minnesota. So we expanded in 1996 to include Nebraska. Now, what that expansion meant was we had a couple of guys at Pro Farmer. They were working in the sales team, Steve Carr and Terry Johnston. And they went out and did the tour in Nebraska for 2 years without reporting the data. They did that so that we would actually have something to compare it to when we went out and started to talk about what we were seeing on tour. And we started doing that in 1998, but at least we had a couple of years of data that Steve and Terry went out there and collected with a few others, but they were heading up the teams. They went out and collected the data, gave us something to compare to, and that's when we expanded to the Western Belt then in 1998. And we've been running the same routes since 1998. We've added some routes in that time, of course, but we run 10 routes on the western leg of the tour, the same 10 routes that we run every year. And out east, 12 routes run. And the eastern leg of the tour has changed up some. It used to start in Dayton, Ohio, and make its way to Worthington, Minnesota. Now it starts in Columbus, Ohio, then over to Bloomington, Illinois. Over to Indianapolis, Indiana, Bloomington, Illinois, Iowa City, Iowa, and then up to Rochester. The western leg of the tour starts in Sioux Falls down to Grand Island, over to Nebraska City, back up to Spencer, Iowa, and then we meet up with the eastern leg of the tour in Rochester.
Yep. All right. So you folks that have listened to this podcast probably know what the crop tour is because it gets talked about a lot and
Mhm.
for good reason. But for folks who don't know, if you can describe what the crop tour is as
Mhm.
best as you can, describe what is the Pro Farmer Crop Tour as it is today.
Yeah, it's investigative reporting is what it is. That's the reason that we started it at or took it over at Pro Farmer. And uh, part of the mission at Pro Farmer is to level the playing field for farmers. And that means giving them the same amount of information in a timely way that the grain companies have always had. And that was really the reason that we felt that the crop tour fit in with Pro Farmer and the mission that we've got there. At Pro Farmer, it's the one thing that we do every year, Chad, that is for public consumption. Everything else is for members only. And the crop tour we felt was so important, and Quentin made it that way. But he got it to the point that it is as you described it when we started the conversation, Chad. It's an industry event, and it's investigative reporting, and the information is out there, and it needs to be gathered and presented in the way that it is. Otherwise, what are we going to do every year? We're going to just very simply take USDA at its word and say, yes, that's what the size of the crop is. We've got enough experience running the tour now and collecting information. And Chad, we'll pull 1,700 corn samples from 7 states in 4 days. We'll pull about the same number of soybean samples. And the process on corn has gotten to the point that we feel comfortable with it enough now after 30 years of doing it, that what we get from tour and the data that we collect on corn, if there's a big difference between what we're seeing on crop tour and what USDA is saying, then obviously we feel like there's got to be some convergence on those estimates at some point, and USDA's got to take a closer look at what they're seeing out there.
Okay. So, Chip, if you would describe the scientific process, because there is
Hmm.
a methodology when you
Yep.
gather, what did you say, 1,700 plus corn samples and whatever it is on soybeans. Tell me the how. How do you go about
Yeah.
doing that on tour?
Okay. Consistent randomness is the most important thing here, Chad, and we've been doing it the same way for the past 30 years. Quentin and his crew did it the same way. Illinois Farm Bureau did it the same way, and that is you travel the same routes every year at the same time of the year. That keeps things consistent. Now, in the cornfields, we do things the same exact way in each and every cornfield. We get past the end rows and go 35 paces into the field. Now, once we get 35 paces down the main rows, and yeah, even if you're planting 48 end rows, we still get past the end rows and then go 35 paces in. And that allows us to do a couple of things. Number one, it gets us away from the high traffic areas that might be at a gate hole. The other thing is it's going to help to remove bias. There's no way to stand at the edge of a field and look into it and see what you're going to see once you get past the end rows and get 35 paces into the field. Now, each team travels with a 30-foot rope with a hook on it. And once we get to that 35th pace, we hook the rope at the base of a corn stalk and measure off 30 foot of row using that rope. Then we count all the ears that will make grain in 2 30-foot rows. From one of those rows, we will collect the 5th, the 8th, and the 11th ear, and those become our sample ears. Now, a lot of the yield estimating process out there will count the number of kernels per row. We measure the grain length in inches, and we round it to the closest quarter inch off of those 3 ears, and we figure the average grain length in inches, and then we count the number of kernel rows around the ear, average that, and have an average number of kernel rows around. And then we've got the ear population in the field and the row width in the field. That is our final factor, because that's going to be determined. We'll divide it all, but it's just very simply the average number of ears in 30 foot of row times the average grain length in inches times the average number of kernel rows around that ear, and then divided by the row width. And once we've done that, it kicks out a calculated yield from what we're going to find in that spot. Now, soybeans, we don't get all the way to a yield. What we're really doing is trying to figure out how much of the soybean factory is up and running out there. So we are calculating the number of pods in a 3x3 foot square. We go to a representative spot in a bean field, measure off 3 foot of row, count all the plants in the 3 foot of row, pull 3 plants at random, count all the pods on those 3 plants, and then calculate the average number of pods per plant. Once we've done that, it is very simply the average number of pods per plant times the number of plants in 3 foot of row. That gives us the number of pods in 3 foot of row, and then times 36 and divided by the row width. That way we can compare a 7.5-inch drilled bean field to a 30-inch wide row bean field, and we're still looking at the same number, the number of pods in a 3x3 foot square.
Yeah. So just on an aside, I'm curious, what are your thoughts about pods per square yard? How does that correlate, or is there no correlation to yield? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there is, and it's a moving target, to be honest with you, Chad. That's why we update it and we run a 5-year average when we tried to extrapolate what that might turn into for a yield. For example, 1,000 pods in Ohio might be worth 45, 46 bushels per 1,000 pods counted. In Nebraska, that number is going to be higher than that. It's probably in the 49, even 50 bushel range per 1,000 pods counted, for a couple of reasons. It's different management, it's different growing environment. Nebraska guys, once we figured out how to irrigate a bean crop, they know how to make a bigger bean, and that's what it's really talking about. We don't even try to get it all the way down to the number of beans per pod, Chad. That is a number that is going to come in very close to 2.5 every year, unless you are doing some extraordinary measures to feed that crop. You're going to be really close to 2.5 beans per pod. And that's kind of how we use that data then to figure out what the impact on yield is going to be.
Okay. All right. So that's what happens during the tour itself.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe can we spend a moment or two and talk about the events? Because there are 4 events, one each night on the Eastern Corn Belt, one in the Western, each night in the Western Corn Belt as well. But and I've been to a few of those, and it is entertaining. It is informative. There's a lot of information exchange that happens on this tour and afterwards in the evenings too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got the 3 events on the eastern leg, 3 events on the western leg, and then we come together for a big event on in Rochester, that with both the western and the eastern legs wrapping up there. And yeah, there is a lot of information that is shared. And Chad, I think the cool thing about it is it's real-time information. We are taking the samples that were collected that day. We've got a data team that is headed up by my daughter. She's been doing it for, 12 years, 13 years now, something like that. And she understands the data collection process and how that data is entered into the system. And she helps us to scrub that data. So we've got data checks that are happening throughout the day, because the data is being entered as the scouts are out in the field doing that. So once all the data is in for a state, she summarizes it for us and puts it in front of Brian Grady on the eastern leg of the tour and puts it in front of me. We check it one last time to make sure that there's nothing that feels like it's really crazy or out of line with what we would normally see. And that becomes the data that we share that night. So it's real-time data, like you said, Chad. And I think that's one of the reasons that it is exciting and it is informative is because we're learning about the corn and soybean crops that are out there in each of those states and those tour areas. We're learning about them on a real-time basis. And we've got farmers. I mean, in Grand Island, there's going to be probably 400 farmers there at the country club that are going to be talking about what we're seeing. And there's going to be, another 350 in Nebraska City. We'll probably have close to 600 farmers with us in Spencer at the fairgrounds. And then at the final event in Rochester, it's going to be close to 800 or 900 people that'll be there in Rochester.
All right. Very good. We've kind of built it up. And we'll talk about the significance of the tour and what it means to you, and what it means to farmers in the market. But before we do that, maybe we can just give me your best story from a pro farmer crop tour. What's an interesting, neat, or funny thing that happened to you on a crop tour?
Well, we try to be serious, but at the same time, we're out there for, we're on the road for 10 hours a day. Sometimes you start to get a little punchy by the end of the day, and we do start to have some fun out there. It's always fun. It's great we get to ride with different people each day on tour. We travel in basically 3-person teams out there, 3 people per vehicle, but we mix that up every day. So you get to meet some real characters when you're out there on the road. I got to go all the way back to, boy, this has been a long time ago, but in eastern Nebraska, I had a reporter with me out there on the road, Andrew Jackson, and I just decided, Andrew Johnson. And I just decided that I was going to leave him out to dry. And he was in the vehicle filing a report. I was in a soybean field. I turned back around, and a Nebraska state trooper had stopped by to make sure that he was okay. I just got down in the bean field out there and kind of hid and let him handle it on his own. I had to show myself eventually and go out there and get him out of some hot water, but everything was fine. And we have a good time out there. And some other things that happen when we're out on tour, we will get into fields where we get to 35 paces past the end rows and it's a 0. We're in the middle of a drowned out spot. If that happens, we'll record the 0, Chad, and move on down the road. We've also been in spots in a cornfield that have generated some eye-popping yields, 315 to 330 bushels per acre. And the question always comes up, come on, is that field really going to yield that? Well, the answer is in that spot, yeah, probably. But that's one thing about crop tour is if we end up pegging the yield of a field, it's completely by coincidence because we end up in the average spot of that field. Now, how often is that going to happen when you get past the end rows and go 35 paces in? It doesn't happen that often, but we're pulling that one sample. Each sample that we pull is one from one big cornfield and we're going to pull 1,700 samples from that one big field. And it's been a long time that we figured this out, Chad. The best number that we generate from crop tour is when we take all of the samples, put them into one spreadsheet, and figure one average yield off of all the samples.
Yeah.
When we do that gives us a number that's going to be pretty doggone close to what the national average yield is going to be. I mean, you think about it, when you go through Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, South Dakota, and Nebraska, and you figure one average yield from that group, it better be doggone close to what the national average corn yield is going to be. And that's probably what I've learned over the years the most is trust the numbers, let the numbers speak for themselves. Don't let your expectations get too high or too low. Wait until you see the numbers and see what the numbers are telling you.
Yep. All right. With as
Yeah.
many vehicles and as many people are out on the road during this week, I would imagine, visiting with law enforcement, that's got to happen periodically. I would
I,
imagine I would imagine you've never got stuck. I would have never been asked. I bet you've never been asked off a piece of property or anything like
no,
that, huh?
that happens. That absolutely happens. And we, when it does happen, we move on down the road. We understand that and get on the road and move down to the next spot on stop on our routes. And yeah, I think I've twice now. I think I've made contributions to the Knuckles County law enforcement out there in Nebraska. So yeah.
So they know you're. See, that's the thing. If you do it every year at the same time, they know you're coming, Chip.
Yeah. How did this deputy know to call me Chip when my license says Charles?
See, there
He
you
says,
go.
Chip, you need to slow down out here. And I said, okay, I get it.
That's because he's got the radio on. That's why.
Yeah.
All right. Let's we'll bring it back to kind of what we all started with, and in the idea of how significant this is. Two-part question: how significant is this crop tour to the farmer, to the people that you're interacting with on the tour, and how big of a deal is it for everybody that participates in the market?
Yeah. It becomes a conversation piece. There's no question about it for the farm community. But when you get right down to the information that we're collecting, I think it's really important for farmers to have somebody out there doing this work. And the reason that I say that is because it is an effort to level the playing field for farmers. That's the bottom line. I mean, we talk about the grain companies and the information that they've got. They're out there doing the same thing. They're just not doing it publicly. We are doing it publicly and doing it for consumption of the general population of farmers, so that they've got the information and can make some informed marketing decisions based on that going forward. So how big of a deal is it to the market? I think over the years it has been a big deal, and there have been years when the crop tour has deviated significantly from what USDA showed us in the August crop production report, even the September crop production report. Heck, you go all the way back to 1993, Chad, the first year that we ran the tour. That was the year of the flood in the Western Corn Belt in Iowa and Minnesota. We knew the corn crop wasn't out there after we went out there on tour, but all USDA kept telling us was that there was a big corn crop out there and rain makes grain and all of that stuff. And we knew from the tour that the corn crop was not there. They didn't show us reality until November of 1993. Now, there's been some other issues with the crops out there. 2010, 2009 were other years. Now, since then, they've stopped doing their objective yield plots in August, and they don't go out and take a look in the field at their objective yield plots until September now. So this is the first look under the husks of the crop in general. And, for 2024, like I said, you try not to let your expectations get too high or too low before you get out there on the road. But for 2024, I keep thinking about all the issues that we had getting this crop in the ground in South Dakota, Minnesota, northern Iowa, spots in eastern Nebraska. And now the crop looks pretty good in those areas. Yes, we can still see the drowned out spots. Yes, we know that there were some issues out there in the spring, but the crop is far enough along that now it's covering up a lot of the problems that might be out there. I know that some guys are out there taking a look at their crops in those areas, and they're coming back and saying, you know what, there may have been some pollination issues. You know what, there's some nitrogen problems. You know what, I don't have the stand out there that I thought maybe I had. And all of those problems from the spring, this is really the first time that the first chance we've got to go out and identify some of those problems. Now, the other thing, go over to the Eastern Corn Belt, Illinois and Indiana. 225 bushels per acre is what USDA estimated as of August 1. Chad, that's not only a record, that's a record by a long ways.
Mm-hmm.
So is it really as good? Is it really as good as what USDA is indicating in Illinois in particular, but Indiana and Ohio, they don't have it a record yield yet because there's 2 different corn crops in Ohio. The planting dates are that different on that Ohio corn crop that there's literally 2 different corn crops growing over there. So we'll see what kind of an impact that might have on the Eastern Corn Belt as well. So
Yep.
We're going to try to identify some of the problems that we had in the spring and see what kind of an impact that's going to have on the average yield. And then the Eastern Belt is, it's a question that we always seem to ask. Is it really as good as what USDA is telling us?
Sure. All right. One more question, and then we'll wrap things up. With the addition of, like satellite imagery, and you can get some real-time data that way. And, DTN did a digital yield tour this week, the week before yours, where they put out a bunch of things. How does the advancement of that sort of technology, does that complement what you do? Does that, how does that make yours more or less relevant? As technology advances, what does that mean for the Pro Farmer Crop Tour?
You would think that it would replace it. And we keep asking the question, why isn't it? Why isn't it replacing the crop tour and the groundwork and the ground truthing and actually going out there and taking a look at what's happening? But the reality is the companies that are doing those satellite work and digital work are coming along on crop tour to ground truth what they've already got.
So I guess that kind of says everything about it, right?
You still got to get dirty, Chad.
Yep.
You still got to get dirty. You still got to put the work in to get out there and take a look and see what's really out there.
Yep. All right. So I guess this is your opportunity maybe for just final thoughts. Again, we've covered a lot of things. Obviously folks are going to be watching this as it takes place. But what do you want people to, I guess, know, understand, remember, even beyond this year's crop tour, but just in crop tour in general?
Yeah. Use the data, please. But when you use it, compare it to past years. So is this crop better than what it was a year ago? Is this crop worse than it was in, pick a year? So compare tour data to tour data. That's the most important thing. And use the data, use it how you see how you want to use it. And we understand that there are people that absolutely love crop tour. We get that, and they're going to be paying very close attention. We also understand that there are people out there that hate the crop tour, and if that's the case, I understand that. It's just a question of understanding why we're out there doing it. It's investigative reporting, and we're going out there trying to ground truth what USDA is telling us is out there.
All right. Very good. Well, good luck on tour. Thank you, Chip. And hopefully your wallet is as thick when you leave, when you get at the end of crop tour as when you started. Okay.
Yeah. Very good. Very good, Chad. Thank you.
Again, that's Chip Flory with Pro Farmer. We're talking about the Pro Farmer Crop Tour that takes place every August. Of course, it's third week in August here in 2024. And a little bit about it, what it is, its significance, and again, how, like he says, how you can use it. Again, Grain IQ is a production of the Nebraska Rural Radio Association with support of the Nebraska Soybean Board. It's brought to you in part by Nebraska soybean farmers and their checkoff. Thanks for joining us on today's Grain IQ podcast. I'm Chad Moyer.
Grain IQ is a production of the Nebraska Rural Radio Association with support from the Nebraska Soybean Board. It is brought to you in part by Nebraska soybean farmers and their checkoff. Grain IQ is hosted by Chad Moyer and produced by Rebel Saklocha. It is written and edited by Alex Makovica. Our project manager is Bryce Duskett. You can listen to Grain IQ on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or online at ruralradionetwork.com.